Welcome to the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This podcast is dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like all the best bookshops, this podcast is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. So tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book at the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. I'm Stacey Horan, author, book lover, and host of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This is episode number 179. For more information about this or any of our episodes, go to my website, staceyhoran.com. If you enjoy the podcast, leave us a review, like us on social media, and share us with your friends, family, and fellow readers. In today's episode of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet, I'm chatting with author Michael Kaufman about the first two books in his Jen Liu mystery series, The Last Exit and The Last Resort. Set in Washington, D.C., about 10 years in the future, this series of political thrillers features two main characters, Detective Jen Liu and a sentient biocomputer named Chandler, who happens to be implanted in Jen Liu's brain. In this not-too-distant future, Jen and Chandler come up against global conspiracies, political intrigue, the development of longevity treatments, both legal and black market, and a global climate crisis that is having dangerous and deadly consequences. While Jen Liu's world may be confronting many of the problems we're encountering today, Michael assures us that there is a sense of hope as well as a fair bit of humor in these stories. In this episode, I'll chat with Michael about his writing journey, the importance of having a tight interaction between character and plot in mysteries, and his various works in progress and other writing goals, as well as a few other things. Coming up. Michael Kaufman, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
Good to be with you.
I thought what we could do today is start by talking about your new series, the Jen Liu mystery series. You've got two books out, The Last Exit, book 1, and The Last Resort, your newest, book 2. If you don't mind, maybe introduce us to the series, and then we'll talk about each of the books in turn.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the series. As you might imagine, these are set in Washington, D.C., about 10 years in the future, 2033 and 2034. And it's not, I have to start by saying these are not grim dystopian books. You know, we've all read those books and seen those movies where by the end you just want to, end it all. I'm optimistic about the world, and it's reflected there, but I'm also deeply troubled. I'm deeply troubled by growing inequality. I'm deeply troubled, of course, by the climate crisis, by the backlash against women's rights and LGBTQ plus rights, and on and on. And so these books actually are set in this world in which is still confronted with these huge problems. And yet there's a sense of possibility. They're fun books. There's a lot of humor in them. They're fun to read. And they as I said, they revolve, or as you said, they revolve around Washington, D.C. cop detective named Jen Liu. And one of the things that's particular about the series is that half of the chapters are narrated by her synthetic computer implant in her brain. His name is Chandler, as in, of course, Raymond Chandler. And he is this wannabe tough guy, but he's only 3 years old at the start of the series. So he has a bit of a hard time pulling off the tough guy veneer. But it's these are books that are, they're page-turning novels, but they're also fun. And they also, I think we can talk about it more, engage in some issues that I think are important to mystery readers.
Let's set up the scenarios for the two books for listeners. Let's start with the first one, The Last Exit.
Well, the first one, and I should just say, even though it is a series, and they do build on each other, so far. They will continue to build on one another. They can be read in any order. They really are standalone books. So this world of Washington, D.C. in 2033, I could sort of give a list of things, currently in Washington, D.C., but, I don't, they're not so much they're not engaged in the usual, evening news politics, but really the bigger issues. So The Last Exit is focused around a growing number of people who are suddenly dying and aging overnight. That's one of the things happening. But the other thing that's happening is that there are rumors of an illegal version of a longevity drug. And this longevity drug is something that's been made available or is available only to the ultra rich, whereas other people are just trying to get by. So there's a bootleg version of this longevity drug, and Jen Liu is trying to figure out who's behind it, and also if it's the thing that's mysteriously killing people or if something else is at stake. And as you might imagine from a mystery, before long, the crosshairs are on her, and it's her life that is at stake. But she's up against the powers that be, and this is a bit of a good versus bad. But we're cheering for Jen to get the job done and come out alive. Which, given that it's a series, you can imagine that she just might do.
Right. But it'll be close. It'll be a close call, I'm sure.
Of course. Well, that's the roller coaster.
Let's assume she makes it through book 1 and into book
Big spoiler,
2.
Huh?
We set up book 2 for us, The Last Resort.
The book 2, The Last Resort, starts with, and I'm not going to give away any plot points, but it starts with the bizarre accident on a golf course where a woman is hit by a golf ball and within a couple of days dies of being struck by a golf ball, of all things. And of course, everyone in the world assumes it's an accident, including the coroner. But Jen Liu, among 7 or 8 billion people, decides it's murder. And the reason she decides that is the woman who is killed is a media darling, a lawyer who has won a case right up to the Supreme Court that is forcing the oil and gas and coal companies to pay reparations for all the damage they've caused to the climate and the world. The only hitch, though, is that there's a deadline that this lawyer's got to be able to prove exactly when these companies knew about the impact of carbon emissions on climate, and she hasn't come up with the smoking gun yet. So Jen Liu decides that she was murdered before she can come up with the smoking gun. So she's got to track down the killer, but as she starts to do this, of course, various suspects emerged. Is it her abusive ex-husband? Is it some shadowy figure high up in one of the oil companies? Is it political opponents? I mean, who knows? So she's on the trail of this. So again, trying to sort of follow an impossible to prove crime and how she could ever prove that it was a crime. And as in book 1, being told by the authorities to just lay off and don't go there. Meanwhile, I should say, because I mentioned Chandler in relation to The Last Exit, this wannabe tough guy, this computer implant. And I have to tell you, Stacey, one of the things that I did not expect to happen in this series was that his character would develop as a real character. One of the things that I think separates good writing from bad writing when it comes to fiction, whether it's straight ahead fiction or genre fiction like mysteries or science fiction, is characters have to develop. Like when I pick up a book and there's, the character is the same on page 300 as page 1, or the same in book 10 of a series as in book 1, I'm thinking this is not good writing, because part of the point of fiction is to tell our stories, it's to entertain, it's to escape, it's to inform, all these different things perhaps. But it's also, I think, to reflect the realities and the complex realities of our lives and our own evolution as human beings, even if it's in small ways. Well, I didn't expect that to happen to a computer. It was this implanted in her brain. But as soon as I started writing the first book, he started questioning things and challenging his boss, Jen Liu, and wanting to assert his independence just like a growing kid would. And that continues in book two. And we're beginning to see his own questioning of what it means to be alive or not. And so I'm having a lot of fun with this Chandler character. And certainly when I hear from readers, that's always one of the things they mention.
What is it like writing a character who, while he appears on the page, he doesn't actually appear bodily on the page? It's a character, it's a voice in her head, but it's a character all on its own. I'm sure that creates some challenges as well as a lot of fun. There's probably a lot of license there.
There is a lot of license. The way I manage it is that his chapters are first person narratives. So he can talk about, first of all, the things he's seeing through her eyes and hearing through her ears and experiencing. But he's also able to talk about what he doesn't experience. There's this whole running thing in it about not being, he's able to experience sight and sound very well, but not smells, for example, or tastes or physical sensations. He can register them, but they don't have meaning attached to them as they do to humans. And so there's a bit of this, internal dialogue and commentary that goes back to that theme of what it means to be human and to be alive. So that's the way I deal with that. The other half of the chapters are a third person narrative. As you know, Stacey, there's a whole, big discussion, and it's a good discussion around appropriation of voice. I mean, who can speak for whom? And I did want my central character to be Jen Liu as the idea of the series developed. She, was there, but I didn't feel that I should write that in the first person. And so those chapters are actually written as a standard third person narrative. She did this, she went here, said that. But the Chandler chapters, those are first person. So I guess you could say Chandler's in my head a bit.
Let's talk a bit about Jen Liu. You said she was there as you were developing the ideas for the stories. Did she just sort of walk into your head fully formed, or is she sort of an amalgamation of people or inspiration from other characters you've read?
She didn't pop in fully formed, and I can't remember when I first started thinking about her. The basic idea of setting something in the near future in Washington, D.C. came on a long walk I was taking in D.C. with a friend of mine and an occasional co-writer, and we were just riffing on book ideas, and we started talking about this. He had the idea of doing something in the future. Anyway, we were going back and forth, and as I started thinking about how I would want to do that and populate that, I immediately thought of a woman cop. In a way, in a very small way, although they're totally different as people. It is inspired by my wife, who is of Chinese descent, and has the same indefatigable sort of strength and refusal to back down, in a good sense, that Jen Liu has, just that perspicacity and just get on with it. Now Betty's a totally different person. She's an architect, and her family background was totally different than Jen Liu's. But it was a bit of a homage to Betty's, to her strength and her will and her, just that sense no one's going to push me around, that she carries. But beyond that, like any character, they just start developing, and it's this amazing process that it's so exciting. Like I don't try to, in none of my books do I try to have characters, by and large, once in a while a minor character, but I try not to have them based on someone I know or met or have seen. Once in a while, I'll have an image in my head of someone, but certainly not for my main characters. And I like to see them develop in relation to the story. So there's this wonderful back and forth between plot and character. It's often said that mainstream fiction is character driven by and large, certainly literary fiction, and being simplistic here, but being character driven, whereas genre fiction, like mysteries, is plot driven. And there's a certain truth to that. I mean, certainly when I write a mystery as opposed to more literary nonfiction, it has to be much more tightly outlined. My literary fiction I don't outline, but mysteries I certainly do. That plot has got to drive the book. There's no space in a mystery for a 3-page description of a walk in the snow. It's got to drive the plot. But similarly, I really think again, a good mystery has this tight interaction between character and plot. And so what I found first as I started thinking about it, but then particularly as I started writing and then rewriting, was that as the plot developed, the character developed in response to it. And then, of course, that then sent me back to change things in the plot. I got to know that character better. And then what starts happening is this wonderful thing that, I'm sure you've heard and you may have experienced, but heard from other writers of, I'll be thinking about the next chapter and I'm maybe a little bit stuck and I'll go for a walk. And as I walk, I start hearing the different characters in that chapter having a conversation among themselves. And and as they do, it's both, yes, it's working out the dialogue, but it's also working out the plot and the structure and advancing who these characters are. And that's when I realized, oh, she wouldn't have done this in that chapter. She's not, it's not within her character, or it doesn't follow from what she's already done. And so it might lead to me going back to change the character, or it might mean that I'm just digging way deeper than I knew into this character, who she is, how she would behave. And I think that, for me, that's part of the exciting part of writing fiction.
Have the characters ever taken you on a significant enough detour from your planned plot that you've had to really rework what you were planning to write? Any significant deviations caused by your characters, by getting to know them better?
In these 2 books, no, because I did do a lot of plotting and thinking before I started writing. But I did in one of I think it was my first novel that I wrote many years ago, and it's somewhere on my computer, and undoubtedly not very good. But I remember there was one point where I was about to write a scene where this estranged couple goes for a walk around the block, and by the time they get back to one of their houses, whichever it was, they've decided to get back together. So, I'm writing away and they're going on this walk and talking about their relationship and what happened and what's to be. And by the end of it, they're absolutely not going to get together. And it was so funny because, the plan was they were going to get back together. But authors sometimes talk about it mystically, like, oh, the characters have a life of their own. Well, they actually don't. But what it does mean, and this is just as wonderful, I think, even more wonderful, is that as a writer, sometimes we know and understand our characters much more deeply than we think than we consciously do. So we have a much more unconscious appreciation of these other characters, just like we do in real life. When we meet people, we get a sense of someone that we may not even think about. And basically, in that case, even though it seemed phantasmagoric that my characters had a life of their own, what was actually happening is that I knew my characters deep down unconsciously more than I consciously thought about them. And that writing that actually forced me to learn more about them. So yes, it can happen, and it's very cool when it does.
Let's talk about the setting for a bit, because you mentioned this is set in the near future. So I imagine you had to do at least a little bit of world building for this book. Yes, you're using Washington, D.C., a real place, and so you can point to streets and buildings and things like that. But what did you design for your setting? What did you create that's maybe separate or different from the reality that we know if we just visited DC?
One of the things I really appreciated in the reviews so far, well, for both books, is people saying good world building, and that's obviously a big compliment. I made a decision at the beginning not to get all gizmo oriented. This isn't 1950s science fiction where it's all focused on what new gizmos people have. There's certainly a few of those, but it's only 10 years in the future. And I try to, there's a bit of that, but I try to keep it as grounded as possible, while at the same time imagining some of those, technological changes, but not going too far with that, because, our guess is now for 10 years from now, in terms of technology, yeah, we can come up with some, but I certainly do try to create this new world. And one of the things that I did, for example, with The Last Exit, was create this world in which, at the very beginning, Washington is being overwhelmed by smoke from massive fires in the Allegheny Mountains. And I wrote this before the huge fires on the West Coast that happened right before publication of that book. So, I was thinking, oh, what if there were these massive forest fires and filling cities with smoke? Because, and well, anyway, that was something that sadly came true by the time the book came out. Another thing that I had in this book, again, thinking about the future, was there's what seems to be some strange virus going around. Again, I wrote this pre-COVID, but people are definitely freaking out about it. But I have to tell you, Stacey, that there was one funny moment for me in the editing. At the very beginning, as I said, of The Last Exit, that's the first one, Jen Liu is wearing a face mask because of all the smoke. And in the original, and remember, this is written pre-COVID, I had, she slipped on her N95. In the editing, either I realized or one of the editors said, no one is going to know what an N95 is. So we edited it, just a small edit. We changed it to her N95 mask. Well, of course, by the time, or shortly after the book came out, COVID had hit. Everyone in the world knew what an N95 was.
Right.
But so part of imagining this new world is not going too far in the future, but sadly coming up with too many things that are chillingly real. The number of displaced people in this book that are swarming across the country, from Kansas that is now just turned to a dust bowl again, or New Orleans that's now underwater, or parts of Florida. And sadly, we don't have to have a crystal ball to know that at least some of those things are in the works and are going to be happening.
What are your plans for the rest of the series? Do you have ideas for more books? Do you already have them plotted out? Are there topics, issues that you know now that you want to hit in future books?
I'm glad you put it that way, as issues, because yes, I have some. For the third book, I've begun to outline it, and so I certainly have plot ideas for that and character ideas. What's going to happen? How will Jen Liu as a character continue to evolve? How will her relationship continue to evolve? How will Chandler continue to evolve? Who are the bad guys going to be? So certainly all that is key. They will continue to explore issues, and I think that I believe that readers in general, and certainly mystery readers and science fiction readers, they're thinking people. They're thinking about the world. And yes, we want entertainment. We want page turners. We want to escape a bit. And so hopefully I provide all that. But at the same time, I do want to situate this in the world in which we live. And hence the theme in the first one on growing economic and social inequality, the theme in The Last Resort around climate change and also violence against women. And the future books are going to, continue this exploration. There's got to be something around the impact of artificial intelligence. I mean, there's so much we know now about, AI being used for writing or for manipulating images. It's going to be something on that. There's big issues in the world around food security. So there's issues around migration. So there's a lot of issues. These books are not nonfiction books. They're not there to explain an issue. They're not there to lecture people. But this is just like we inhabit this world that has issues that confront us every day. So does Jen Liu, and that comes out in the books. So these books are fun. They're entertainments, but they're also, I think, ones that give the reader pause for some thought. I hope anyway.
Yeah. And we should mention, these are not the only books that you have written. They're your latest books out, but I'm curious, the books that you have written prior to this, how did they affect what you write now? Take us a little bit on your writing journey, if you don't mind. Where did you start from your first one? And how have you seen your writing change?
Hmm. Well, aside from two other novels that I've written, one literary fiction and one anti-war fable, that got a beautiful blurb from Jane Fonda, which I loved. But a lot of my writing over the decades has reflected my work to engage men and boys to promote women's rights, to end violence against women, and to positively transform the lives of men. And that work has taken me to, gosh, about 50 countries, working with the UN, governments, women's groups, NGOs, companies, educators. And a lot of my writing reflects that. So my most recent nonfiction book was called The Time Has Come, Why Men Must Join the Gender Equality Revolution. And so, these books and the different books, both popular and academic, on those issues really reflect both what I've learned from the women in my life and other women around me, women who've really inspired me, but also what I've learned from men and the challenges that men face paradoxically in a male-dominated world. And so these are not scolding books, but they're books that really embrace feminism from a man's point of view, but also does it without, it's not about collective guilt or collective blame, but really about collective love, you could say, for the women in our lives, but also to really talk about how men will benefit from gender equality and gender equity. And we see that nowhere clearer than in the transformation of fatherhood that's been happening over the past decade or two. As I've moved increasingly from nonfiction writing to fiction writing as my preoccupation, I just continue to learn a lot as a writer and about how to be a storyteller. Not only what you need to say, but what you need to, not say. One of the things in writing nonfiction is that you've got to spell it out. Your job is to make everything as absolutely clear as possible so no one could misunderstand or misinterpret a point. With fiction, it's very different because sometimes it's what you don't say that's important. Sometimes it's knowing that just that one word creates an impact and a mood that having a paragraph of explanation could never do. So it's learning to say less, to do less, to do more with less. It's learning not to be carried away with endless description, but to let where possible dialogue or the character's actions make your points for you, so you don't have to say here's the point, and also to really trust the reader. One of the things that bugs me sometimes when I'm reading a book is when they just explain too much and they have too many stage directions and everything is just fed to you like we feed pablum to a baby. Yeah, I want my novels to be clear and not they're not esoteric novels. They're not confusing, but they also respect our ability as readers. It respects our imaginations. I want a good book to be able to live in my imagination. And that's one of the things I try to do to create that for a reader. And so for me, that's a big difference in my fiction writing and my nonfiction writing, which I try to live by.
Do you have other plans to write in different genres? You've tackled a number of them already. I'm curious what your other goals are as a writer.
Boy, that's a good question. What are my goals as a writer? I certainly will continue this series. I've also been working on two other things. One is a literary novel that I started many years ago, and it's a story in a way tells the story of the generation that came of age in the 60s. And I've returned to that. I'm really excited by it, but it's tough going to tell a story that's set over decades and decades. So I'm working on that. I'm also working on a classic thriller, and the Jen Liu series, they're not thrillers in the sense of the world is at stake and can he or she or they save humanity type thing. But I'm actually working on a really fun page turning thriller that I've just yesterday I got comments back from my agent. So I'm hoping to have that rewritten and back to her in over the next month or two, and hopefully we'll see that in a year or so. But it's really fun to do. And there's a third writing project, and that's a young adult fantasy, and it's that I've co-written. I won't get into details on it, but my agent doesn't handle YA fantasy, so I don't know. I'm looking for an agent or someone, but I'm really excited because again, it reflects the values I'm interested in. It's focused around an ecological theme. It's feminist sub themes, LGBTQ sub themes, but it's really sort of an ecological YA. It's a present day. It's fantasy, but it's set in the present day, and I'm excited by it. But it's one of those writing projects where you've got to find an agent. So yes, that's one thing that's still hanging out there.
Interesting. Well, fingers crossed.
Yes, if you know any agents, let them know. It's wonderful.
Good. Okay. Well, if people want to learn more about you, your books, keep up to date with what's happening, where should they go to find you and that information?
I would say just look under, between Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, but probably not. They could go to my website, which is michaelkaufman.com. And there's information and both on my books, but there's also pages you can just download articles I've written. You can subscribe to my newsletter. There's all that sort of stuff, but it's michaelkaufman.com.
And if people want to purchase a copy of The Last Exit or The Last Resort, or hopefully both, where can they go to buy them?
They can get that at their favorite bookstore. I certainly encourage people to support indie bookstores, and some of which now you can access online through IndieBound. There's also another site called, there's other ways to order that, but support your local bookstores, your physical chains, bookstores. But of course, also you can order these through Amazon. They're both available as hardcover books. They're available as Kindle and other ebooks, and they're available as recorded books. So they're whatever format you're into reading or listening. They're available widely online and in stores.
Wonderful. Well, Michael, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast. And I want to wish you luck with the Jen Liu Mystery Series. We'll look forward to the next installments when they're ready. And good luck with your work in progress. Fingers crossed for that one as well. So congratulations on everything you've accomplished so far, and best of luck with the rest of your writing journey.
Stacey, thank you so much.
The Bookshop at the End of the Internet is a podcast dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like any good bookshop, this podcast features a wide variety of books by the equally varied and interesting authors who felt compelled to write them. This podcast gives you a chance to meet these wonderful writers and discover your next must-read book. Listen to the authors describe their books and tell you their stories in their own words. My interviews feature books from all genres and authors from all walks of life, including those who are indie published, as well as those published by small presses and large publishing houses. Looking for unique, not so easy to find books for yourself, a friend, or a book club? Tune into this podcast and find your newest favorite author, or maybe a soon-to-be bestseller. This podcast, like all the best bookshops, is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. Tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book. You never know what treasures you might find in the Bookshop at the End of the Internet.